When we envision World War I, the mind often conjures a stark tableau. Endless lines of muddy trenches, the agonizing stalemate of the Western Front, and a generation swallowed by brutal, industrial-scale attrition. This familiar, often harrowing image has etched itself into our collective consciousness, defining the Great War for decades. But what if this powerful narrative, compelling as it is, only scratches the surface of a far more intricate, profound, and globally transformative catastrophe? Tonight, we journey beyond that iconic, yet limited, battlefield. We will peel back the layers of popular understanding to reveal a conflict that truly reshaped the entire planet. Prepare to discover the forgotten fronts where empires clashed in deserts, mountains, and vast oceans, often with technologies and tactics that seem alien to the trench warfare paradigm. We will uncover hidden innovations, both brilliant and horrifying, that accelerated human progress and destruction simultaneously. This wasn't merely a war of empires. It was a societal earthquake, forging new roles for women, igniting nationalist fires, and planting the seeds of future conflicts. From the sprawling battlefields of East Africa to the icy waters of the Arctic, from the skies above burgeoning cities to the laboratories of visionary scientists, beyond the trenches challenges common perceptions. We will illuminate the long-lasting repercussions and hidden legacies that continue to resonate in our modern world, uncovering a war far more complex, far-reaching, and ultimately, far more relevant than previously imagined. This is the untold story of the war that truly forged the 20th century. When we conjure an image of World War I, our minds invariably drift to the Western Front, a desolate, muddy landscape crisscrossed by an endless maze of trenches. We see weary soldiers, trapped in a stalemate, battling for mere yards of ground. But this powerful, iconic imagery, while undeniably true for millions, is but a fragment of a far grander, more terrifying tapestry. The Great War, as it was then known, was not confined to the battlefields of France and Belgium. It was a truly global catastrophe, fought in every corner of the world, involving over 100 countries and reshaping continents. From the scorching deserts of the Middle East to the frozen peaks of the Italian Alps, from the dense jungles of East Africa to the remote islands of the Pacific, and across the vast, unforgiving oceans, the conflict raged. Empires clashed not just in Europe, but across their sprawling colonial territories. German raiders stalked Allied shipping lanes from the South Atlantic to the Indian Ocean, while Japanese forces seized German possessions in China and the Pacific. Australian and New Zealand troops fought valiantly in Gallipoli. Canadians distinguished themselves at Vimy Ridge, and Indian regiments served with distinction in Mesopotamia and France. The war's reach was so immense that its echoes reverberated in places few history books fully acknowledge, transforming local populations into unwilling participants in a European conflict. The sheer scale defies easy comprehension, demanding a new perspective. This was a war of unprecedented industrial might and human sacrifice, stretching far beyond the popular narrative. It wasn't just about static lines of trenches. It was a dynamic, fluid, and often brutal struggle for resources, imperial dominance, and national survival played out on an astonishing array of stages. As we peel back these layers, we begin to understand how the seeds of future conflicts were sown and how the modern world was forged in the fires of these forgotten fronts. And perhaps nowhere was this forgotten complexity more starkly illustrated than in the dense, inhospitable terrain of colonial Africa, where a truly unique and often overlooked campaign was about to unfold. While Europe bled in the trenches, a very different kind of war was being waged in the sprawling, untamed wilderness of German East Africa. This was the domain of Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck, a Prussian officer whose name, though largely forgotten in the annals of mainstream history, stands as a testament to strategic brilliance, sheer endurance, and the often overlooked heroism of colonial troops. Faced with overwhelming Allied forces, British, South African, Belgian, and Portuguese, Lettow-Vorbeck led a small, multi-ethnic army, primarily composed of highly disciplined Askari soldiers, in a campaign that defied all odds. From 1914 to 1918, his Schutztruppe, never numbering more than 15,000 men, tied down over 300,000 Allied troops, resources, and naval vessels that could have been deployed to the Western Front. This was a war of relentless marching through malarial swamps, arid bushland, and treacherous mountains, where disease claimed more lives than bullets. Leto Vorbeck mastered the art of guerrilla warfare, launching swift, devastating raids, disrupting supply lines, and melting back into the unforgiving landscape. His Askari soldiers, fiercely loyal and intimately familiar with the terrain, were the backbone of his force, demonstrating incredible resilience and tactical prowess against technologically superior adversaries. Incredibly, when the armistice was signed in Europe on November 11, 1918, Leto Vorbeck remained undefeated. He only surrendered a fortnight later, after hearing official confirmation of Germany's capitulation, becoming the only German commander to successfully invade British territory during the entire war. His campaign, a true odyssey of survival and resistance, highlights not only the strategic genius of a single commander, but also the immense, untold sacrifices of African soldiers who fought and died for imperial masters in a war that was not their own. This Bush War stands as a stark reminder that the conflict's tentacles reached far beyond the familiar European battlefields, leaving an indelible mark on distant lands and paving the way for further global entanglements. From the sweltering heat of Africa, we journey northeast to another theater of profound strategic importance, the arid plains of Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq. Here, the Great War took on a different character, less about guerrilla tactics and more about imperial ambitions colliding over a resource that would define the 20th century: oil. As the Ottoman Empire aligned with the Central Powers, Britain, with its rapidly industrializing navy, dependent on petroleum, recognized the critical vulnerability of its Persian oil supplies and the strategic gateway to India. Thus began the Mesopotamian campaign, a brutal struggle for control of the Tigris and Euphrates river valleys. British and Indian expeditionary forces, comprising a diverse array of regiments, landed in Basra in 1914, pushing inland against determined Ottoman resistance. The fighting was fierce, marked by extreme temperatures, devastating floods, widespread disease, and often inadequate supplies. The siege of Kut al-Amara in 1915 to 1916 became a particularly harrowing chapter, ending in one of the largest surrenders of British troops in history. Yet, despite these setbacks, the Allies persisted, eventually capturing Baghdad in 1917, consolidating their hold over key oil-producing regions. The Mesopotamian campaign was a crucible where modern geopolitical interests were forged. It laid bare the direct link between military might, imperial expansion, and the control of natural resources. The lines drawn on the maps by victorious powers after the war, particularly the Sykes-Picot Agreement, would carve up the Ottoman Empire's territories, creating new nations and sowing seeds of resentment and instability that continue to fuel conflicts in the Middle East to this day. This sideshow of the Great War, often overshadowed by the Western Front, was in reality a foundational conflict, a stark prelude to the endless cycle of resource wars and political upheavals that would plague the region for decades to come, proving that the war's global impact was not merely immediate, but profoundly enduring. Leaving the searing heat of Mesopotamia, we ascend to a theater of conflict where the enemy was as much the environment itself as the opposing army, the Italian front. Here, high in the Dolomite Alps, Austro-Hungarian and Italian soldiers waged a brutal, often forgotten, white war from 1915 to 1918. This was not the mud-soaked plains of Flanders, but a vertical battlefield of jagged peaks, treacherous glaciers, and sheer rock faces, where altitude and extreme weather conditions presented challenges almost unimaginable to those fighting elsewhere. Troops on both sides, often poorly equipped for such unforgiving terrain, endured temperatures plummeting far below freezing, relentless blizzards, and the constant threat of avalanches, often deliberately triggered by the enemy, which claimed thousands of lives. Soldiers carved out defensive positions, observation posts, and even entire subterranean cities within the ice and rock, using dynamite and pickaxes. Tunnels were bored through mountains for weeks, sometimes months, culminating in massive mine explosions that reshaped the very landscape. Supply lines were a logistical nightmare, relying on precarious cableways, mules, and the sheer grit of men hauling artillery pieces and provisions up dizzying inclines. More than a dozen major battles along the Isonzo River defined this front, each a grueling, bloody stalemate in a terrain designed to kill. The physical toll was immense. Frostbite, hypothermia, and pulmonary edema were as deadly as any bullet. This was a war of unimaginable hardship, a testament to human endurance in the face of nature's fury, waged by men often overlooked in the grand narrative of the Great War. Their struggle, high above the world, serves as a powerful reminder of the war's extraordinary diversity and the countless ways in which it pushed humanity to the very limits of survival. From the vertical battlefields of the Alps, we plunge into a silent, terrifying new dimension of warfare beneath the waves. The First World War marked the true emergence of the submarine, a technological marvel that would forever alter naval strategy and push the boundaries of ethical combat. Germany's U-boat campaign became a pivotal, existential threat, aiming to choke Britain's vital supply lines and starve the island nation into submission. Early U-boats were primitive by modern standards, cramped, claustrophobic, and perilous for their crews, yet they wielded devastating power. Initially, prize rules dictated that merchant ships had to be warned and their crews allowed to abandon ship before sinking. But as the war dragged on and Britain's blockade tightened, Germany escalated to unrestricted submarine warfare in 1917. This meant any ship, military or civilian, sailing into designated war zones, was a legitimate target, often without warning. The sinking of the RMS Lusitania in 1915, a civilian liner carrying American passengers, was a brutal precursor, igniting international outrage and contributing to the eventual U.S. entry into the war. The U-boat menace forced the Allies to innovate rapidly, leading to the development of convoy systems, hydrophones for detection, and depth charges for destruction. It was a cat-and-mouse game played out across the vastness of the Atlantic, where unseen predators lurked, and every voyage was a gamble against sudden, violent death. Thousands of merchant sailors and civilians perished. The psychological impact on island nations like Britain, so reliant on sea lanes for survival, was profound. The U-boat campaign not only brought the Great War to the civilian doorstep, but also foreshadowed the total wars of the future, where the distinction between combatant and non-combatant blurred, leaving an enduring and often dark legacy on maritime law and naval ethics. As the war raged beneath the waves, a new domain of conflict was rapidly evolving high above the earth, the sky. At the dawn of World War I, aviation was in its infancy, barely a decade removed from the Wright brothers' first flight. Aircraft were fragile, canvas and wood contraptions initially viewed as little more than curious novelties or reconnaissance tools. Pilots would wave at each other in the early days, sometimes even exchanging pistol fire, a quaint notion quickly shattered by the brutal realities of war. But the demands of global conflict spurred astonishing technological leaps. From slow, unarmed observation planes, aircraft quickly transformed into deadly fighting machines. Machine guns were synchronized to fire through propeller arcs. Biplanes evolved into faster, more maneuverable triplanes, and aerial combat, or dogfights, became a terrifying ballet of skill and daring. Pilots became the new knights of the air, their exploits glamorized and their names, like Germany's Red Baron, Manfred von Richthofen, and Britain's Albert Ball, becoming household legends. Beyond reconnaissance and combat, aviation added a new dimension of terror. Early bombers, though crude, began to strike behind enemy lines, bringing the war directly to civilian populations, something unimaginable just years prior. The sight of enemy aircraft overhead, even if they posed little direct threat, had a profound psychological impact, shattering the illusion of safety on the home front. This rapid evolution, from experimental curiosity to essential weapon, fundamentally changed the nature of warfare. The Great War forged the concept of air superiority, laying the groundwork for every aerial conflict that followed, proving that the sky was not merely a vantage point, but a crucial and deadly new battlefield. From the awe-inspiring spectacle of aerial combat, we descend into one of the Great War's most insidious and psychologically devastating innovations, gas warfare. Beyond the basic understanding of chlorine or mustard gas, the true terror of chemical weapons lay not just in their physical harm, but in the pervasive, unseen dread they instilled. On April 22, 1915, at Ypres, the release of chlorine gas marked a horrifying turning point, a silent, creeping green cloud that heralded a new era of inhumanity. Unlike bullets or shells, gas was an invisible, indiscriminate killer. Chlorine gas attacked the respiratory system, causing victims to drown in their own fluids. Phosgene was even more lethal, often odorless, with delayed effects, leading men to believe they were safe before succumbing hours later. But the most feared was mustard gas, introduced in 1917, which left horrific blisters on skin and internal organs, blinding victims and causing agonizing, slow deaths. It clung to the ground for days, contaminating entire areas, and its smell, often described as garlic or horseradish, became synonymous with terror. Gas masks, initially crude pads soaked in chemicals, then elaborate respirators, became essential, if horrifying, pieces of equipment. The frantic scramble to don a mask at the cry of gas was a constant, nerve-shattering ritual. Even if a soldier survived, the psychological scars were deep. The perpetual fear of an unseen enemy, the grotesque suffering of comrades, and the knowledge that one's own breath could become a weapon, led to widespread trauma and long-lasting health issues, often overlooked in post-war care. Gas warfare transcended the physical battlefield, invading the very minds of soldiers and leaving an indelible, toxic legacy that continues to cast a long shadow over our understanding of human conflict. From the silent, unseen terror of gas, we turn to a mechanical monster whose clunky, grinding arrival promised to shatter the stalemate of the trenches, the tank. Born out of desperation to break the deadlock on the Western Front, the tank was a truly revolutionary concept, a landship designed to cross no man's land, crush barbed wire, and withstand machine gun fire, protecting infantry as it advanced. Its origins were shrouded in secrecy, initially referred to as water tanks or supply tanks to mislead enemy intelligence. The first prototype, Little Willie, in 1915, was rudimentary. But by September 15, 1916, at the Battle of Courcelette during the Somme offensive, the Mark I tank made its combat debut. These early behemoths were slow, unreliable, and prone to breaking down or getting stuck in the mud. Crew conditions were horrendous: deafening noise, noxious fumes, and scorching heat. Yet, even with their significant limitations, they instantly proved their potential, demonstrating an ability to clear barbed wire and suppress enemy fire that no other weapon possessed. Technological refinement continued at a frantic pace. By 1917, at the Battle of Cambrai, hundreds of tanks were deployed in a coordinated assault, achieving an unprecedented breakthrough in German lines, a glimpse into the future of mechanized warfare. The tank, initially a clunky experimental weapon, had found its purpose. It was not without its struggles, its early deployment often marred by mechanical failures and tactical missteps. But its impact was undeniable. The tank forever changed the face of land warfare, transforming static trench lines into dynamic battlefields, ushering in an era where speed, armor, and firepower would dominate. It was a testament to the war's relentless drive for innovation, a symbol of humanity's ingenuity, born from the depths of despair, destined to redefine conflict for the next century. For many, the defining image of World War I is the desolate, shell-cratered landscape of the Western Front. But this lunar tableau wasn't sculpted by small arms fire or isolated skirmishes. It was the brutal masterpiece of artillery, the undisputed king of the battlefield, responsible for an estimated 2/3 of all casualties. Beyond simply big guns, artillery in World War I evolved into an instrument of unparalleled mass destruction, its symphony of relentless, earth-shattering cacophony. At the war's outset, artillery was largely direct fire, primitive in its precision. Yet, the relentless demands of trench warfare spurred revolutionary innovations. Commanders needed to strike unseen targets deep behind enemy lines. The answer lay in mathematical precision, indirect fire. Sophisticated calculations, based on ballistics, meteorology, and terrain, allowed gunners to accurately shell positions miles away, hidden from view. This required highly trained artillery officers, using complex range tables and observer reports relayed by new technologies like field telephones and early radio. One of the most profound advancements was sound ranging. Imagine a network of microphones strategically placed across the front, listening intently. When an enemy gun fired, the sound wave hit each microphone at a slightly different time. By meticulously measuring these tiny time differences, engineers could pinpoint the exact location of the enemy battery, often within yards. This wasn't guesswork. It was a deadly science, turning the enemy's own fire into a self-betraying signature. Then came the creeping barrage, a tactical innovation that would forever alter infantry assaults. Instead of a single, thunderous volley, the creeping barrage was a moving wall of explosives designed to advance just ahead of the attacking infantry. It pulverized enemy wire, suppressed machine gun nests, and psychologically shattered defenders, forcing them to cower in their dugouts as the friendly troops advanced. If executed perfectly, it was devastatingly effective, allowing soldiers to walk right into enemy lines. If miscalculated, friendly fire became a tragic reality. From the colossal 420mm Big Bertha howitzers that pulverized fortresses to the continuous, nerve-shattering drum fire of smaller field guns, artillery reigned supreme. Its devastating power didn't just kill. It reshaped landscapes, annihilated morale, and etched a new kind of terror into the very soul of warfare, setting the stage for the grim realities of trench life that followed. The relentless thunder of artillery, described in our last segment, created the very crucible of World War I, the trenches. While the popular imagination often conjures images of endless mud, rats, and unremitting misery, and these were undeniably present, the reality of trench life was far more complex, a testament to human resilience, adaptation, and the enduring power of camaraderie. Beyond the headline horrors, daily life in the trenches settled into a grim routine. Stanza before dawn and dusk was an essential ritual when every soldier was at alert for a potential enemy attack. The rest of the day was a mixture of guard duty, repairing trench walls with sandbags, digging new latrines, draining water, and endless cleaning, a Sisyphean task against the omnipresent mud and grime. Letters from home were a lifeline, meticulously read and reread, a fragile connection to a world that felt increasingly distant. But moments of respite, however brief, were vital for maintaining sanity. Soldiers developed their own dark humor, their own slang, and found ways to create pockets of normalcy. Makeshift entertainment flourished, card games, dice, reading dog-eared newspapers, writing poetry, or simply sharing a quiet smoke. Talented musicians would sometimes improvise concerts, their melodies cutting through the distant rumble of artillery. In the dugouts, often surprisingly elaborate underground shelters, a sense of community formed. Here, men shared stories, dreams, and fears, forging bonds of brotherhood that would last a lifetime or be shattered in an instant. Yet, beneath this facade of routine and camaraderie lay the constant, insidious psychological toll. The omnipresent threat of death from sniper fire, a random shell, or a sudden gas attack created a state of perpetual hypervigilance. Sleep was often a fragmented, uneasy affair, punctuated by distant explosions or the cries of wounded men. The stench of death, of putrefaction, of unwashed bodies, was a constant companion. This relentless exposure to trauma, this daily dance with oblivion, chipped away at the strongest minds, planting seeds of an invisible wound that would manifest long after the last shot was fired. This ever-present, insidious enemy, unlike the bullets and bombs, was the perfect precursor to an even more silent, yet equally deadly, foe: disease. While the roar of artillery and the crack of rifles dominated the soundscape of the trenches, an unseen, insidious enemy stalked the front lines, claiming more lives than bullets and bombs combined. Disease, fueled by appalling sanitation and relentless exposure, became a silent killer, often overshadowed in the historical narratives focusing on battle heroics. For many soldiers, simply surviving the trenches meant battling typhus, cholera, and dysentery, the true arbiters of fate. The conditions were ripe for epidemic. Millions of men were crammed into narrow, waterlogged trenches, living alongside their own waste and the unburied dead. Latrines were often rudimentary, overflowing, or simply non-existent. Clean drinking water was a precious commodity, frequently contaminated by decomposing bodies or chemical seepage. Body lice, fleas, and rats were ubiquitous, acting as vectors for a host of devastating illnesses. A single contaminated water source could decimate an entire company, rendering them unfit for combat or worse. Specific ailments became synonymous with trench life. Trench foot, a horrifying condition caused by prolonged exposure to cold, wet, unsanitary conditions, would rot soldiers' feet, leading to gangrene and amputation. It was a slow, agonizing descent into mutilation. Trench fever, spread by lice, caused excruciating headaches, muscle pain, and debilitating fevers. Dysentery raged, leading to rampant dehydration and weakness. The sheer scale of sickness was staggering. Records suggest that for every soldier killed in action, several more were incapacitated or died from disease. Medical services, though evolving, were overwhelmed. Field hospitals struggled with the sheer volume of cases, often lacking the resources or knowledge to combat these burgeoning epidemics effectively. The constant flow of sick and dying men from the front placed immense strain on logistical networks and sapped the strength of armies already stretched thin. This unseen enemy not only claimed lives but eroded morale, compounded the psychological trauma, and silently dictated the pace of battle. The struggle against disease was a relentless, often losing battle, adding another layer of despair to the already horrific conditions and further complicating the desperate need for effective communication in such a chaotic environment. In a war defined by unprecedented scale and technological complexity, effective communication was not merely desirable, it was absolutely critical. Yet, as armies stretched across vast, dynamic front lines, often under a constant deluge of artillery fire and obscured by the fog of war, the simple act of relaying information became a Herculean, often deadly, task. The failure to communicate swiftly and accurately frequently led to devastating consequences. Commanders miles behind the front often relied on methods that seemed archaic in an era of machine guns and gas. Runners, young soldiers tasked with hand-delivering messages across open ground, faced almost certain death from snipers or shell fire. Many simply never made it, their vital dispatches lost with their lives. Field telephones were a significant advancement, but their copper wires were fragile, easily severed by artillery barges, leaving entire sectors isolated for critical hours. Repairing these lines meant exposing engineers to the same deadly dangers as runners. More exotic methods were also employed, sometimes out of desperation. Carrier pigeons were released, carrying vital reports encoded in tiny capsules. Signalers used flag waving, semaphore, and even signal lamps at night, but these were visible targets and required line of sight, often impossible in the chaotic, smoke-filled battlefield. Early wireless radio technology was rudimentary, unreliable, and susceptible to enemy interception, often only effective over short distances and in specific conditions. This communication breakdown created a perilous disconnect between strategy and reality. Orders frequently arrived too late to be acted upon, or were based on outdated intelligence, sending men into traps that no longer existed or ordering attacks on positions already overrun. Friendly fire incidents increased due to a lack of coordinated information. The fog of war wasn't just a metaphor. It was a tangible, deadly reality woven from static, severed wires, and dead messengers, further exacerbating the profound psychological toll on soldiers, who often felt abandoned or misled. The sheer scale of these communication failures underscores the immense pressures on the human mind, leading directly to the invisible wounds of shell shock that afflicted so many. The visible wounds of World War I, shattered limbs, gaping wounds, faces disfigured by shrapnel, are seared into our collective memory. Yet an equally devastating, but often invisible, wound silently afflicted millions: shell shock. This profound psychological trauma, poorly understood and often tragically misdiagnosed, became a defining and haunting legacy of the Great War, revealing the deep, unseen scars carried by an entire generation. Initially, shell shock was believed to be a physical injury, a concussion caused by the vibrations of exploding shells literally shaking the brain. Soldiers exhibited a terrifying array of symptoms: uncontrollable tremors, paralysis, muteness, severe anxiety, terrifying nightmares, and a profound inability to cope with normal life. Many were simply unable to function, their minds broken by the relentless stress of combat, the constant threat of death, and the indescribable horrors they witnessed. Early treatments were often crude and ineffective, ranging from electroshock therapy to accusations of malingering and cowardice. Thousands of soldiers were court-martialed, even executed for desertion or insubordination, their cowardice later understood as a symptom of their shattered mental state. Gradually, however, pioneering medical officers like Dr. Arthur Hurst began to understand that shell shock was not a physical injury, but a psychological one, a profound nervous breakdown caused by sustained mental strain. His talking cure and rehabilitation methods, though controversial at the time, offered a glimmer of hope, moving away from punitive measures toward a more compassionate, if still imperfect, understanding. Shell shock was the precursor to our modern understanding of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. The Great War forced society to confront the reality that the human mind, like the body, could be catastrophically damaged by the stresses of war. The invisible wounds of shell shock continued to plague veterans for decades after the armistice, manifesting in broken families, unemployment, and lifelong suffering. A generation of men who survived the physical onslaught returned home to fight a silent, internal war, carrying the unbearable weight of their experiences. This recognition of mental trauma spurred critical advancements in medical care, prompting innovation in healing not just the mind, but also the catastrophically damaged bodies of those who survived. Amidst the unprecedented carnage and the harrowing invisible wounds of shell shock, World War I also became an unexpected crucible for medical innovation. The sheer scale and brutality of injuries forced doctors, nurses, and scientists to confront surgical and medical challenges on an unimaginable scale, spurring advancements that would forever change healthcare, not just for soldiers, but for humanity itself. Early in the war, survival rates for severe injuries were abysmal. But necessity is the mother of invention. The concept of triage, sorting casualties by the severity of their wounds to prioritize treatment, became standard practice, saving countless lives by ensuring the most critical cases received immediate attention. Blood transfusions, though previously attempted, became more practical with the understanding of blood types and the development of rudimentary blood storage techniques. This direct replacement of lost blood was revolutionary on the battlefield. Antiseptic techniques, pioneered by figures like Dr. Alexis Carrel and Henry Drysdale-Dakin with their Carrel-Dakin method of continuous irrigation of wounds, dramatically reduced infections that had previously been a death sentence. X-ray machines, once novelties, were brought to the front lines, allowing surgeons to precisely locate shrapnel and bullets within shattered bodies, guiding life-saving operations. Perhaps most striking was the birth of modern reconstructive surgery. Faced with a generation of men disfigured by facial injuries, pioneering surgeons like Harold Gillies in Britain began to develop groundbreaking techniques for skin grafts and tissue reconstruction. His Queen's Hospital for Facial Injuries at Sidcup became a hub for early plastic surgery, restoring not just features, but dignity and identity to men whose faces had been obliterated. This era also saw the rapid development of sophisticated prosthetics, artificial limbs that allowed amputees to regain mobility and a semblance of normalcy. Brave medical personnel, from stretcher bearers braving shellfire to nurses working tirelessly in overwhelmed field hospitals, were the unsung heroes. Their courage, combined with scientific ingenuity, transformed the odds of survival and recovery. The war's terrible cost was mitigated, in part, by this astonishing leap forward in medical science, extending its benefits far beyond the trenches and impacting all subsequent medical care. These advancements were crucial not just for European soldiers, but for the millions of invisible armies from colonial territories who also suffered horrific injuries. While the Western Front often dominates our historical memory, World War I was truly a global conflict fought on fronts spanning continents. Yet, largely absent from mainstream narratives are the millions of invisible armies, soldiers from Africa, India, and other imperial territories, who fought and died for empires not their own. Their sacrifice, often overlooked and poorly documented, is a crucial, yet largely forgotten, chapter in the war's global impact. From the very outset of the war, Britain and France drew heavily on their vast colonial empires. The Indian Army alone contributed over 1.5 million men, serving with distinction in France, Mesopotamia, and East Africa. Sikh, Gurkha, and Muslim soldiers endured the freezing mud of Flanders, far from their tropical homelands, their bravery often celebrated in dispatches, but their contributions rarely elevated to the same prominence as their European counterparts. French colonial forces, primarily from North and West Africa, the tirailleurs Senegalese and Zouaves, fought ferociously on the Western Front, in the Balkans, and in Africa, often bearing the brunt of the deadliest assaults. Their motivations were complex and varied. Some were professional soldiers, others recruited by force or economic coercion. Many believed their service would earn them respect, equal rights, and a greater say in their own futures upon returning home. Yet, they often faced systemic discrimination, paid less than their European comrades, and segregated in their living conditions. Medical treatment, as we've seen, was a major concern for all soldiers, but colonial troops sometimes received inferior care. The human cost was immense. Hundreds of thousands of colonial troops perished, their graves often far from their families and largely unvisited. Their service, however, had profound and lasting repercussions. While the empires promised recognition, it was often slow to materialize. The experience of fighting alongside Europeans, witnessing their vulnerabilities, and being exposed to new ideas of self-determination planted seeds of nationalism and resistance. These men, having fought for freedom abroad, returned home to demand it for themselves, becoming key figures in the anti-colonial movements that would sweep across Africa and Asia in the decades to come. Their sacrifice, though forgotten by many, profoundly shaped the geopolitical landscape of the 20th century. And while men from every corner of the globe fought, women too were enacting their own revolution on the home fronts and beyond. As men from every corner of the globe marched off to the front lines, a profound social revolution was quietly, yet forcefully, unfolding on the home fronts. World War I shattered traditional gender roles, pulling millions of women into spheres of work and public life previously deemed exclusively male. Their vital contributions fundamentally reshaped societies, accelerated the suffrage movement, and irrevocably altered social expectations for generations to come. With able-bodied men consumed by the war machine, women stepped into the void. They poured into factories, particularly the dangerous munitions plants, becoming munitionettes who produced the shells and armaments vital for victory. These were not dainty tasks. The work was often dirty, physically demanding, and perilous, with exposure to toxic chemicals like TNT turning their skin yellow. Canary girls. On farms, the Women's Land Army took over agricultural labor, ensuring food production continued despite manpower shortages. Beyond manual labor, women moved into essential services. Thousands became nurses, from the professional ranks to voluntary aid detachments, VADs, serving in field hospitals close to the front, confronting unimaginable suffering. Others worked in transport, driving ambulances and delivery vehicles, or took on clerical and administrative roles, supporting the vast bureaucracy of war. Their omnipresence in these new roles was a powerful, undeniable demonstration of their capabilities and their critical importance to the war effort. This mass mobilization had immediate and far-reaching consequences. For many women, it was their first taste of economic independence and public responsibility, challenging deeply entrenched Victorian notions of female domesticity. Their visible and indispensable service directly fueled the women's suffrage movement. In Britain, the Representation of the People Act of 1918 granted voting rights to millions of women over 30, a direct acknowledgement of their wartime contributions. While the post-war period saw attempts to push women back into traditional roles, the genie was out of the bottle. The war irrevocably altered the social fabric, paving the way for greater gender equality, new career opportunities, and a permanent shift in how women were perceived, not just within their homes, but within the broader society. The Great War, in its immense destruction, inadvertently became a catalyst for women's liberation, leaving a lasting legacy on the very definition of womanhood. When we envision World War I, our minds often conjure images of stark recruitment posters. Your country needs you. But these iconic images were merely the tip of a vast, sophisticated iceberg, a global propaganda machine unprecedented in human history. Every warring nation understood that victory wouldn't just be won on the battlefield, but in the hearts and minds of its citizens. Governments meticulously engineered public consent, demonizing enemies with chilling effectiveness and shaping public opinion through a relentless barrage of media. From London to Berlin, Paris to St. Petersburg, state-controlled narratives infiltrated every aspect of daily life. Newspapers, carefully vetted and often censored, published sensationalized atrocity stories. Real, exaggerated, or entirely fabricated, painting the enemy as barbaric and inhumane. German soldiers became the Huns, a monstrous force threatening civilization, while Allied forces were depicted as crusaders for justice. Pamphlets, cartoons, and even children's books reinforced these messages, indoctrinating the youngest generations with patriotism and prejudice. Films, then a nascent medium, were quickly co-opted, showing brave soldiers, suffering civilians, and the undeniable righteousness of their nation's cause. Imagine a quiet English village, its inhabitants gathering for a newsreel, absorbing images of distant battlefields and tales of German cruelty, their resolve hardened, their fears stoked, their willingness to sacrifice amplified. This wasn't just about encouraging enlistment. It was about sustaining morale through years of unimaginable sacrifice. It was about ensuring factories kept running, women took on unprecedented roles, and food rationing was accepted without widespread dissent. Propaganda fostered an us versus them mentality that permeated society, justifying the horrors of war and insulating populations from uncomfortable truths. The psychological impact was profound, creating a collective identity forged in shared purpose and mutual hatred. The seeds of future conflicts, born from these engineered narratives of blame and grievance, were sown deep within the global consciousness, forever altering how nations perceived each other and the very fabric of their societies. The drumbeat of propaganda, designed to rally nations, also served to steel citizens for the harsh economic realities that World War I unleashed. Beyond the trenches, a hidden war was waged on the home front. A relentless struggle against scarcity, inflation, and the crushing financial burden of total war. Governments, desperate to fund their colossal war efforts, implemented sweeping economic policies that profoundly impacted everyday citizens, forging an intricate economic web that stretched from the kitchen table to global financial centers. Rationing became a way of life, not merely an inconvenience, but a stark reminder of the war's insatiable appetite. From 1916 onwards, countries like Germany, Britain, and France introduced strict controls on essential goods. Bread, sugar, meat, coal, once taken for granted, were meticulously measured, allocated via ration cards. Queues became a familiar sight, a testament to shared sacrifice, but also a source of mounting frustration. Families adapted, devising ingenious recipes from limited ingredients, while black markets inevitably emerged. Beyond consumption, the war demanded production. Millions of women entered the workforce, filling roles traditionally held by men, transforming industrial landscapes and challenging pre-war social norms. To finance the monumental costs of modern warfare, artillery shells alone consumed fortunes. Governments turned to their citizens through war bonds. These patriotic appeals, often backed by the same powerful propaganda that demonized the enemy, encouraged ordinary people to invest their savings, tying their personal financial fate to the nation's struggle. Billions were raised, yet the war still bled national treasuries dry. European powers, once the financial titans of the world, found themselves deeply indebted. This vacuum created an extraordinary opportunity, particularly for the United States. Initially a neutral supplier, America's industrial might and abundant resources became indispensable to the Allies. By 1918, the U.S. had transitioned from a debtor nation to the world's largest creditor, its economic star rising dramatically as Europe's waned. This profound shift laid the groundwork for America's emergence as a global superpower, forever altering the balance of economic power and setting the stage for the next century. As the war's economic burdens weighed heavily on populations, an even more insidious threat began its silent, deadly sweep across the globe, an invisible enemy far more potent than any weapon yet devised. The Spanish flu pandemic, emerging in the final brutal years of World War I, delivered a devastating double blow to a world already on its knees. It killed more people than the war itself. An estimated 50 to 100 million lives lost globally. Yet its profound impact is often overshadowed by the colossal conflict it ran alongside. The conditions of total war created a perfect storm for the virus's rapid, lethal spread. Millions of soldiers, living in crowded barracks, trenches, and transport ships, became unwilling vectors. Troop movements across continents rapidly disseminated the highly virulent H1N1 strain, transforming it from a localized outbreak into a global catastrophe. Civilian populations, already weakened by years of rationing, stress, and malnutrition, proved particularly vulnerable. Unlike typical flu strains that prey on the very young and old, the Spanish flu disproportionately targeted healthy young adults, precisely the demographic fighting and supporting the war effort. Governments, fearful of undermining morale and exposing national vulnerabilities, often downplayed or censored news of the pandemic. Spain, a neutral country, had a free press that reported extensively on the illness, inadvertently giving it the misleading moniker Spanish flu. The true scale of the crisis was obscured, yet its presence was undeniable. Hospitals, already strained by war casualties, overflowed with flu victims. Mass graves became a grim necessity. The pandemic undoubtedly influenced the war's final stages, sidelining commanders, weakening fighting forces, and contributing to the general exhaustion that propelled nations towards peace. Even as armistices were signed and celebrations erupted, The flu continued its silent slaughter, shaping the post-war world with a death toll that dwarfed the battlefield casualties. It was a terrifying reminder that humanity's greatest challenges often come not from man-made conflicts, but from invisible forces of nature. While the Spanish flu ravaged populations indiscriminately, a monumental geopolitical earthquake was underway in the Middle East, with tremors that echo into our present day. World War I didn't just decimate European powers. It delivered the final, fatal blow to the once mighty Ottoman Empire, a sprawling entity that had dominated swathes of the Middle East, North Africa, and the Balkans for 6 centuries. Its dramatic collapse redrew the map of an entire region, laying the groundwork for many of the 20th and 21st century conflicts that continue to plague the world. Turkey's entry into the war in October 1914, aligning with the Central Powers, was driven by a complex mix of historical grievances, nationalist ambitions, and a desperate bid to regain lost prestige. This decision opened new, bloody fronts, from the infamous Gallipoli campaign, where Allied forces suffered catastrophic losses attempting to seize the Dardanelles, to the desolate battlefields of Mesopotamia and Palestine. The empire, often dubbed the sick man of Europe, found itself fighting for its very existence, battling not only Allied armies but also internal revolts. The Arab Revolt, instigated and supported by figures like the enigmatic T. Lawrence, saw Arab nationalist forces rise against Ottoman rule, promised independence by the British in exchange for their support. But behind these promises, a darker game was being played. Secret agreements, most infamously the 1916 Sykes-Picot Agreement between Britain and France, carved up the Ottoman territories into future spheres of influence, disregarding the ethnic and sectarian realities of the region. This clandestine deal, along with the Balfour Declaration promising a Jewish homeland in Palestine, created a volatile mosaic of competing claims and aspirations. When the Ottoman Empire finally capitulated in October 1918, its vast territories were indeed fragmented, administered by European powers under mandates. The new borders, arbitrarily drawn by colonial powers, ignited a century of instability, state-sponsored violence, and unresolved grievances, proving that the end of one empire often marks the painful birth of many new, enduring conflicts. As the Ottoman Empire crumbled, redrawing the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East, another global power was reluctantly, yet decisively, entering the fray, poised to reshape the entire world order. For 3 long years, the United States had clung fiercely to its policy of neutrality, a deeply ingrained isolationist sentiment that reflected a desire to avoid entanglement in Europe's perpetual conflicts. Yet, even across the vast expanse of the Atlantic, the war's economic tendrils and moral quandaries slowly pulled America from its self-imposed detachment. President Woodrow Wilson, initially determined to keep America out of the European quarrel, walked a diplomatic tightrope. While officially neutral, American businesses prospered immensely by supplying the Allied powers with food, raw materials, and armaments, subtly shifting economic allegiances. However, German unrestricted submarine warfare began to challenge American sovereignty. The sinking of the RMS Lusitania in May 1915, killing over 100 American citizens, ignited public outrage, but still, Wilson resisted war. It was a series of escalating provocations that finally tipped the balance. Germany's resumption of unrestricted submarine warfare in early 1917, coupled with the revelation of the Zimmermann telegram, a secret proposal from Mexico to ally with Germany against the U.S., proved to be the breaking point. The telegram, intercepted and decoded by British intelligence, exposed Germany's audacious disregard for American neutrality and its designs on North American territory. On April 6, 1917, after impassioned pleas from Wilson, Congress declared war. The arrival of American doughboys in Europe, though delayed by training and transport, provided a crucial morale boost to the exhausted Allied forces and a decisive surge in manpower and industrial might. More than just soldiers, America brought an unparalleled economic engine, and a new moral authority to the conflict. From a nation wary of foreign entanglements, the United States emerged from World War I not just victorious, but as a burgeoning global superpower, irrevocably altering the balance of power and setting its course as a dominant force on the world stage for the century to come. As American doughboys prepare to join the fray, adding their strength to the Allied cause, another contingent of soldiers, often overlooked and entirely unwilling, was already serving with extraordinary courage and loyalty on every front. World War I wasn't fought by humans alone. Millions of animals, from the majestic to the minuscule, were indispensable to the war effort, enduring the same horrors, displaying incredible bravery, and often making the ultimate sacrifice alongside their human companions. They were the unsung heroes of the trenches, the silent sufferers of a conflict not of their making. Horses, numbering in the millions, were the engines of war, pulling artillery pieces through thick mud, transporting supplies, and carrying cavalry into battle. Their immense strength and endurance were crucial, yet their vulnerability to shell fire, gas attacks, and the brutal conditions of the front lines led to staggering casualties. Over 8 million horses, mules, and donkeys perished. Dogs served with remarkable versatility, messengers carrying vital dispatches across shell-blasted landscapes, sentries detecting enemy movements, and even medical dogs, trained to find wounded soldiers in no man's land. Their intelligence and loyalty saved countless lives. Perhaps most surprisingly, pigeons played a critical role in communications. With telephone lines constantly cut, these birds carried urgent messages, flying through barrages of gunfire, often returning with their bodies scarred but their mission accomplished. One famous pigeon, Cher Ami, delivered a message from a trapped American battalion despite being shot, saving nearly 200 men. Even canaries, small and fragile, served a vital purpose, acting as living gas detectors in the treacherous tunnels, their sudden collapse warning miners and soldiers of deadly gases like carbon monoxide. These animals were more than just tools of war. They were companions, morale boosters, and often the only source of comfort for lonely soldiers far from home. Their stories, often heartbreaking, remind us of the vast, pervasive reach of the war's devastation, touching every living creature caught in its grasp. Their sacrifice, though unmedaled and largely unrecorded, stands as a testament to their unwavering spirit in a world gone mad. The unwavering loyalty of animals and the sheer grit of soldiers were vital, but the true, often unseen, backbone of World War I was a monumental feat of logistics and supply chain management. This was the first truly industrial global conflict, and its scale demanded an unprecedented level of organization. Feeding, arming, and transporting millions of soldiers across continents, maintaining their health, and providing them with the endless material needed for industrialized warfare became an immense, complex dance of engineering, economics, and sheer willpower. Without it, the front lines would have collapsed in days. Consider the sheer volume. Hundreds of millions of tons of food, coal, steel, and ammunition had to be moved, often under constant threat. Railways became lifelines, crisscrossing Europe, delivering men and machines to the front, then evacuating the wounded. Ports like Le Havre and Marseille became gargantuan hubs, processing endless convoys of ships from around the world. Factories hummed ceaselessly, transforming raw materials into rifles, shells, uniforms, and boots. Every bullet fired, every meal eaten, every bandage applied, represented a success in a sprawling, meticulously planned, yet constantly challenged supply chain. Maintaining these arteries of war was a constant battle. Roads, frequently churned into impassable quagmires by incessant rain and heavy traffic, required legions of engineers and laborers to maintain. The threat of U-boat attacks on transatlantic shipping meant every convoy was a desperate gamble. Even getting a warm meal to a frontline soldier meters from the enemy was a logistical triumph. This organizational prowess extended to medical supplies, fuel, and communication equipment, essential goods that dictated the pace and possibility of combat. The ability to innovate adapt, and sustain this gargantuan logistical network distinguished victory from defeat. World War I definitively proved that modern warfare is as much about the efficient movement of resources and the mastery of supply chains as it is about courage in combat, laying the fundamental groundwork for military strategy for the rest of the 20th century and beyond. Amidst the roar of cannons, the relentless grind of logistics, and the pervasive drumbeat of propaganda urging national duty, there emerged a powerful counter-narrative, a quiet, yet profoundly courageous stand against the tide. These were the conscientious objectors, individuals driven by deep moral, religious, or political beliefs who refused to take up arms, even in the face of immense societal pressure and severe legal repercussions. Their stories offer a vital perspective, reminding us that even in total war, the human conscience can defy the state. Across Britain, Germany, France, and particularly the United States, thousands of men declared their objection to military service. Many were Quakers, Mennonites, or members of other peace churches whose faith absolutely forbade participation in violence. Others were socialists or political radicals who viewed the war as an imperialist conflict. Their stance was met with widespread condemnation. Public opinion, fueled by jingoistic propaganda, often branded them as cowards, traitors, or shirkers. They faced intense persecution, imprisonment, forced labor, public shaming, and even violence. In some cases, objectors in uniform were subjected to brutal treatment by military authorities, including mock executions, in an attempt to break their will and force them onto the front lines. Yet, they largely held firm. Their refusal to conform, their unwavering commitment to principle, underscored the profound moral dilemmas that total war imposed on individuals. While often unseen and unheard by the broader public during the conflict, their courage carved out a space for dissent, laying important groundwork for future civil liberties and the recognition of individual conscience in times of national crisis. The conscientious objectors were not merely passive resistors. They actively, though often silently, challenged the very definition of patriotism and duty, proving that even when the entire world seemed united in its march to war, the individual spirit of nonviolence and moral conviction could never truly be extinguished. Beyond the barbed wire and the constant thunder of artillery, World War I unleashed a different kind of terror, a silent suffering experienced by millions of civilians living under the iron heel of occupation. While the world focused on the stalemate in the trenches, entire populations found themselves on an unwilling new front line, their own homes. Take Belgium and northern France, for instance. From the war's earliest days, vast swathes of these lands fell under German military rule. Life here transformed overnight from peacetime normalcy to a grim existence dictated by an occupying force. Roads were closed, curfews imposed, and any semblance of self-governance vanished. The German Imperial Army, in its relentless pursuit of resources, systematically stripped these regions bare. Factories were dismantled, their machinery shipped back to Germany. Crops were confiscated, livestock seized. For the inhabitants, this meant unimaginable hardship. Food shortages became endemic, with rations barely sustaining life. Families resorted to foraging, cultivating tiny gardens, and a desperate black market where necessities commanded exorbitant prices. Diseases, fueled by malnutrition and lack of sanitation, swept through towns and villages. But it wasn't just scarcity they faced. Civilians were subjected to the constant threat of forced labor. Men, and sometimes even women and children, were conscripted to work in mines, build fortifications, or repair railways for the German war machine. Refusal meant imprisonment, or worse. Reprisals for perceived resistance were brutal and swift, serving as chilling warnings to others. Executions, like those of Edith Cavell and Léon Fockady, became stark symbols of the occupation's ruthlessness. Life was a tightrope walk between survival and defiance, fear and resilience. Yet, even under such immense pressure, the human spirit found ways to endure. Small acts of resistance, clandestine newspapers, hidden aid networks. These became the quiet battlegrounds where dignity was preserved. The trauma of these years, however, etched itself deep into the collective memory, a testament to the war's far-reaching cruelty and the indomitable will to survive. While occupied territories suffered under direct military rule, the home front in allied nations was far from immune to the war's chilling demands. Total war required total commitment, transforming societies not just through rationing and industrial mobilization, but through an insidious web of government control, surveillance, and social pressure. The battle for hearts and minds was waged with as much intensity as the battles for territory. Across Britain, France, America, and beyond, governments rapidly expanded their powers, ushering in an era of unprecedented intervention into civilian life. Propaganda became a sophisticated weapon, churning out posters, films, and songs that demonized the enemy, glorified patriotic sacrifice, and shamed dissenters. Newspapers were heavily censored, letters from the front scrutinized, and any information deemed damaging to morale ruthlessly suppressed. The truth itself became another casualty of war. Fear was a powerful motivator expertly manipulated by the state. Citizens were encouraged to report slackers, shirkers, and anyone exhibiting defeatist talk. Spy paranoia reached fever pitch, transforming neighbors into potential informants and foreigners into suspected saboteurs. In Britain, the Defense of the Realm Act, DORA, gave authorities sweeping powers, from controlling food prices to banning the flying of kites. In the United States, acts like the Espionage Act of 1917 and the Sedition Act of 1918 stifled free speech, leading to the imprisonment of thousands, including socialist leader Eugene V. Debs, for opposing the war. This was the cost of unity in a total war. Personal freedoms were sacrificed on the altar of national security. Women flooded factories, producing munitions and supplies, fundamentally altering societal roles. Children collected scrap metal. Everyone contributed to the war effort, driven by a powerful blend of patriotism, social pressure, and outright coercion. This pervasive atmosphere of sacrifice and surveillance, where loyalty was constantly questioned and dissent brutally suppressed, demonstrated that the trenches of World War I were not just geographical locations, but a state of mind that infiltrated every home, leaving an indelible mark on the concept of citizenship and the relationship between the individual and the state. From the societal pressures of the home front, we turn to the profound internal landscape of a generation irrevocably scarred. The Great War didn't just shatter bodies and borders. It fractured the very soul of Western civilization, giving rise to what writer Gertrude Stein famously termed the lost generation. This was a cohort of young people, primarily artists and intellectuals, who came of age during or immediately after the war, carrying its trauma into a world they no longer recognized. Before 1914, Europe hummed with Victorian optimism, a belief in progress, reason, and an ordered world. But the industrial-scale slaughter, the senseless waste of life in the trenches, obliterated these ideals. The lost generation returned home to find their values utterly bankrupt, replaced by a profound sense of disillusionment, cynicism, and an existential void. Shell shock, a new and devastating psychological wound, became a metaphor for the deeper societal trauma. This intellectual and emotional upheaval fueled an explosion of artistic and literary innovation. Traditional forms and narratives felt inadequate to express the chaos and despair. Modernism flourished, finding voice in movements like Dadaism, which defiantly embraced the absurd, mocking the very logic that had led to such destruction. Surrealism sought to explore the unconscious, the dreamscape, as a refuge or a reflection of a fractured reality. Literature became a raw canvas for their pain. Ernest Hemingway's A Farewell to Arms articulated the futility of war and love amidst devastation. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby captured the frantic, often superficial hedonism of the Jazz Age, a generation desperately trying to forget or outrun its trauma. Eric, Maria remarks, all quiet on the Western Front provided a visceral, unforgiving look at the soldier's experience, devoid of glory. Poets like Wilfred Owen and Siegfried Sassoon dared to expose the gruesome realities, challenging patriotic myths with searing honesty. The Lost Generation's art was not merely a reaction. It was a redefinition of meaning, a desperate search for beauty and truth in a world that had seemingly lost both. Their legacy reshaped culture, pushing boundaries and forever altering our understanding of trauma, identity, and the very purpose of art. As the dust settled on the battlefields and the Lost Generation grappled with their internal wounds, the world's leaders gathered in Paris in 1919, tasked with forging a lasting peace. Their answer was the Treaty of Versailles, signed in the opulent Hall of Mirrors, a document intended to end all wars. Yet, in its very structure, this treaty inadvertently sowed the seeds for the next global catastrophe. The terms imposed on Germany were designed to punish and debilitate. The infamous War Guilt Clause, Article 231, forced Germany to accept sole responsibility for the war, a national humiliation that festered deep within the German psyche. Astronomical reparations were demanded, crippling the nation's already shattered economy and leading to hyperinflation so severe that banknotes became worthless. Territorially, Germany lost Alsace-Lorraine, vital industrial regions like the Saarland, and all its overseas colonies. Militarily, its armed forces were drastically reduced, its navy scuttled, and the Rhineland demilitarized, a constant reminder of its vanquished status. While the victorious Allies saw this as justice, Germans across the political spectrum denounced it as a diktat, a dictated peace. The League of Nations, President Woodrow Wilson's grand vision for collective security, was crippled from its birth by the U.S. Congress's refusal to join, denying it the power and authority it desperately needed. Without a strong international body to enforce peace or mediate grievances, the treaty's harshness became a ticking time bomb. The economic devastation, national humiliation, and the perceived injustice of Versailles created fertile ground for extremism. In the years that followed, a charismatic demagogue named Adolf Hitler would expertly exploit these deep-seated resentments, promising to restore German pride, rebuild its military, and overturn the treaty's dictates. The unresolved questions of World War I, enshrined in the flawed Peace of Versailles, led directly to the rise of Nazism and, inevitably, the even greater cataclysm of World War II. It was a peace that failed not to end conflict, but to merely postpone it with devastating consequences. The echoes of Versailles reverberated across the 20th century, but the Great War's influence extends far beyond its direct role in sparking World War II. World War I is not merely a historical event confined to dusty textbooks. It is an unfinished war, its unresolved questions and hidden legacies continuing to shape our world today, haunting our geopolitics, our conflicts, and even our understanding of human nature itself. Consider the geopolitical landscape. The collapse of the Ottoman, Austro-Hungarian, and Russian empires, directly accelerated by the war, redrew the map of Eastern Europe and the Middle East, often with arbitrary borders that disregarded ethnic and religious divides. These lines on a map, hastily drawn by victorious powers, continue to fuel conflicts and instability in regions like the Balkans and the Levant, legacies we contend with even now. Then, there's the very nature of warfare. World War I was the first truly industrial, total war. It introduced chemical weapons, aerial bombardment, tanks, and submarines on a mass scale, setting chilling precedents for future conflicts. The concept of targeting civilian populations, once unthinkable, became a grim reality. The refined techniques of mass propaganda and state control over information, pioneered during this era, remain potent. Tools in modern geopolitical struggles, manipulating public opinion and justifying interventions. The psychological toll, what we once called shell shock, is now recognized as PTSD, a pervasive shadow across generations of combatants. The war's brutal efficiency in extinguishing life forced humanity to confront the darker aspects of its ingenuity. Understanding what they don't tell you about the Great War is therefore not just an academic exercise. It is crucial for grasping why certain nations still bear historical grievances, why cycles of violence persist, why nationalism can erupt with such ferocity, and how easily personal freedoms can be eroded in the name of national security. World War I serves as a stark, enduring lesson in the fragility of peace, the destructive potential of unchecked power, and the perennial struggle within the human heart. Ultimately, beyond the trenches is a journey into the untold stories, the hidden legacies. And perhaps the most profound untold story of World War I is not found in grand battles or political treaties, but in the great silence, the quiet omission of millions of forgotten victims and overlooked narratives that shaped this global catastrophe. For every soldier whose name is etched on a monument, countless others simply vanished from memory. We speak of the European fronts, but what of the 2 million African and Indian soldiers who fought for the British and French empires? Their contributions often minimized, their sacrifices uncommemorated in their homelands. What of the Chinese Labor Corps? Tens of thousands of men who toiled in support roles, enduring horrific conditions, many dying far from home. These men, crucial to the Allied war effort, often faced racial discrimination even in death, their graves sometimes separated from European comrades. Beyond the uniformed, we must remember the millions of civilians who perished, not just under occupation, but from disease, famine, and atrocities, their deaths often uncounted in official tallies. The Armenian Genocide, a brutal campaign of systematic extermination by the Ottoman government, took place amidst the chaos of the Great War, its scale and horror often overshadowed by the Western Front narrative. And what of the nurses, the aid workers, the resistors, the children whose lives were forever altered by the war's relentless shadow? The monument to the unknown soldier stands as a powerful symbol, but it also inadvertently represents the vast swaths of humanity whose individual stories we have allowed to slip into oblivion. History, in its pursuit of grand narratives, too often forgets the countless individual lives that constitute its true fabric. To truly understand World War I, to grasp its immense and lingering impact, we must break this great silence. We must seek out these unremembered voices, piece together their fragmented stories, and acknowledge the full, complex tapestry of human experience that made up this most global and devastating of conflicts. Only then can we truly begin to learn from its lessons and honor the true cost of a war that changed everything. Our journey, beyond the trenches, has taken us far from the mud of Flanders, expanding our understanding of a conflict whose global reach truly encompassed every continent. We've unearthed the astonishing technological marvels and the unspeakable horrors they unleashed, witnessed profound social transformations that shattered old orders and forged new identities, and confronted the deep psychological scars left on a generation, wounds that echoed for decades. World War I was not merely a clash of empires, but a seismic catalyst for modern warfare, a crucible in which new nations were forged and old ones crumbled. It was a stark, brutal lesson in unintended consequences, where every action reverberated across continents and through time. Its echoes resonate profoundly in today's geopolitical landscape, shaping borders, fueling ideologies, and reminding us of the enduring fragility of peace and the complex interplay of human ambition, innovation, and suffering. Understanding what they don't tell you about the Great War isn't just about revisiting history. It's about grasping the very roots of our present. It compels us to reflect on the future. What profound lessons, often overlooked or deliberately forgotten, can we truly draw from this pivotal, transformative moment in human history to inform our path forward, ensuring we build a more resilient and peaceful tomorrow?